Hello, everybody. Welcome to City Speak. I'm Clarence Anthony, your host and CEO and Executive Director of the National League of Cities. June marks the start of the Atlantic hurricane season, and cities along the Atlantic coast, as well as the Gulf Coast, are preparing for what is expected to be a highly active season. Communities need to be prepared for extreme weather, even if you're not in the path of the next named storm. I can tell you from growing up in South Florida, it's always about getting your community hardened, educated, and prepared. And actually, there's no community anywhere in the country that is completely immune. Tornadoes, earthquakes, wildfires, droughts, and flooding can strike anywhere in any community. But the important thing is being prepared. Communities also need to be prepared for after an occurrence of a storm or a catastrophe occurs, about rebuilding homes, their businesses. And the rebuilding process can only be more complicated than people expect. Today, as we get prepared for this season, we are so honored to have a mayor join us who has actually gone through this process after an occurrence have occurred to rebuild and lead his community. So we're so honored to have the mayor of Lake Charles, Louisiana, Mayor Hunter, Nic Hunter, with us today to talk about what he's gone through the last few years, including Hurricane Harvey in 2017. And in addition to the COVID pandemic in 2020, Lake Charles was hit by Hurricane Laura and Delta in back to back months. I got to tell you, those kinds of occurrence really do require great leadership. I'm so pleased to be able to welcome to City Speak Mayor Nic Hunter. Mayor, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It is a beautiful day in Lake Charles, and the weather is really nice today in the city of Lake Charles.
Man, I wish I was there. I need to be able to go out and fish or play around a golf. So the next time I'm in the area, I'm going to have to reach out to you.
Today would be a beautiful day for either of those things in Lake Charles.
Okay, thank you. I want to first ask you to tell your story of how did you get involved in public service? Because that's one of the neat things about City Speak when people come on that I learned something unique about them and their why. Why did you get involved? How did you get involved?
I grew up in the restaurant business and still own a restaurant to this day. My grandparents started a restaurant in 1956 and had a small family, and it was truly a family restaurant, and started working when I was very young. My family was pretty apolitical. I couldn't have told you whether we were Republicans or Democrats. We didn't really talk about politics too much around the dinner table. The dinner table for us, quite honestly, was since the time I was 12 years old, was a table at the restaurant because we were working, and it was a great environment. It was a wonderful training ground. The service industry and food and beverage industry is a wonderful training ground for anyone that's interested in public service, just how to deal with people. And I started running that restaurant when I was 17 and really got a heavy dose of what it was like to be an owner and a manager. And I started attending McNeese State University, which is our local college here, and knew I was going to be a business major and knew that I was going to be in the restaurant business forever. I was 20 years old and had my whole life planned out. I was really inspired by history classes at McNeese. And so I made the switch. I made a switch from a degree in business to a degree in history because I was just inspired by those classes and it really got me excited. I got very interested in Louisiana political history. And there was probably a moment in my early mid 20s where all of a sudden helping out nonprofits in the community, getting involved with civic organizations, and just doing great positive things for the community, that those things got me a bigger high and made me feel more fulfilled than financial success or profits at the business. So to this day, I still own 50% of the restaurant. And of course, it's nice when you make a profit, and those are important things to keep a roof over your family. But I got more interested in just public service and kind of giving back to the community in that way than being an entrepreneur and having multiple restaurants. So first dipped my toe into the waters of politics when I was 27 and ran for what we call the police jury, which is similar to a county commission in other states. Was successful in that race. And then when I was 33, I ran for mayor and was successful and became mayor at the age of 33, and I'm 40 now, turned 40 this year. So I'm towards the end of my second term. And if the people will have me, I would love to serve for a third term, which would be next year. And so fingers crossed that we might be able to continue these conversations into 2025.
Wow, that is neat that you got that political service bug in college. So, who was your role model? I mean, and as a public leader, was it a local mayor or a congressional member? Who do you aspire to be?
Before anything, my role model was my grandmother on my father's side, Mrs. Hunter. And she started the restaurant, and she really taught me work ethic at an early age. I never wanted for anything in my life, but she made me work for everything and appreciate everything. And I find, unfortunately, with some of the generation today, that work ethic and appreciation for working for something and earning something can sometimes be lacking. She taught me not only work ethic, but her experience growing up in the Great Depression. Hearing those stories really made an impact on me. And so today, I just appreciate so much every day that goes by that I, have a roof over my head and have the necessities for my family. I understand that those are not guaranteed things. So she was a role model for me. And then in the political world, there was a local gentleman named Ronnie Johns who was a state senator, state representative, local businessman. He went on to become the state gaming executive director of the Gaming Control Board for the state of Louisiana, and just announced his retirement from that position, gosh, about a month ago. But he was one that really, and still does today. I just appreciate him and love him so much. And he really kind of helped me to understand what it truly is to be in public service, and what we should be striving for, and to be in it for the right reasons.
Well, thank you for sharing that because it does take, especially in this time, take leaders who are truly committed and know their why for wanting to serve. I kind of talked a little bit in the intro about growing up in South Florida, and almost every year there was a hurricane coming through South Florida in some form or fashion. And part of my time, I was mayor of my local community, and it takes really real leadership and real ability to coordinate. However, you have experienced Hurricane Laura and Delta hit Lake Charles back to back in months. And even just last month, you experienced more extensive and extreme weather that knocked out power for several days. I want to ask you, what was the biggest unexpected lesson you learned to help you get through those events? And how are you ready for the next event if it occurs?
Well, and to fully kind of set the table for what we went through in Lake Charles, it was in the midst of COVID. the greatest pandemic in 100 years. Hurricane Laura, which hit in August of 2020, was the strongest hurricane to hit the state of Louisiana in 120 years from a wind speed perspective. We did not have the flooding that Hurricane Katrina, for instance, brought to New Orleans, but Hurricane Laura was basically a 30-mile wide tornado that went right through the center of our city. You mentioned Hurricane Delta, which came 45 days later. It was a Category 2. Hurricane Laura was a 4, though some people argue it probably could have been a 5. But then on top of those two, in February of 2021, we had a once in a generation winter freeze. And then in May of 2021, we had a 1,000 year flood event. So we have the unfortunate title or moniker of the most federally declared disasters for a single city over a 1 year span. And so that was a very difficult time in 2020 and 2021 for the city. So to answer your question about what was perhaps the most unexpected lesson learned, I would say that our infrastructure, the infrastructure that we control as a city, our water, our sewer, our drainage to a certain extent, was really suffering and needed upgrades. And I wouldn't say it was a surprise so much, but that there was so much room for advancements and hardening of assets. And we started a lot of that in 2017 when I first came into office from a drainage perspective, especially. But we realized that we didn't have time to wait. We could not wait and do these things in incremental stages. We had to get very aggressive and had to get very deliberate about making those changes. The drainage program we began in 2017, we hope to get through about 6 to 7% of the city a year. But then when 2020 and 2021 happened, we realized we cannot wait. So we actually had the council give us authority to go borrow $20 million to clean out our entire drainage system. We're hopeful that FEMA does reimburse us for some of that. But I guess that would be the answer I could give is it was not a crazy, unexpected issue or realization that we had infrastructure needs, but perhaps the severity and the urgency of addressing those became very apparent in 2020 and 2021.
Yeah, I do think there's this thought from most people that after disasters, um, the next immediate day or within an hour, federal dollars starts to come into your community to rebuild really immediately. But I know that that's not the case because, again, going through it in Florida. But would you talk a little bit about how you have worked with FEMA to be able to deal with some of the limitations that may exist within your community? Because that is the organization or the agency that's there for you. Talk a little bit about that relationship.
Sure. And actually, when it comes to federal dollars, I think there's really two major agencies or areas for funding that sometimes get convoluted. And believe me, prior to 2020, I did not have as educated an understanding as I have today. So I get it. It is very cumbersome. But FEMA itself, FEMA is there in the immediate days before an event. If you know it's a hurricane coming, for instance, you do have a little notice. So FEMA was on the ground for us. And look, I will call a spade, and I'm going to say truly the way I feel about something. Sometimes it is politically expedient or politically fashionable to just cast stones at FEMA and say that they're a broken agency. But I will tell you that FEMA was here when Hurricane Laura hit. FEMA was on the ground. We did not have to say, where is FEMA? FEMA was here. We were in contact with FEMA. They were here in the days after Hurricane Laura. And by and large, as I sit here today, almost 4 years post Hurricane Laura, I would say that our experience with FEMA has been a typical one. Not to say that it's been incredibly terrible, and not to say that it's been a walk in the park. However, I will say that today versus what we had 20 years ago, there are probably more programs and more opportunities for cities to truly benefit from FEMA and make themselves more resilient from FEMA than we had 20 years ago. Now, some of those additional programs come along with additional red tape and bureaucracy. But I will say, by and large, our experience with FEMA has been a positive one. And I believe firmly that because of what we went through in 2020 and 2021, and because of the way we have maximized our FEMA award and utilized FEMA programs, that we are setting up this city for the next 100 years to be ready for future disasters. And we would be naive to believe that we will not get hit again by a hurricane at some time in the future. And I can guarantee this community, I can guarantee this country that when Lake Charles does get hit again by a hurricane, we are going to be a hardened and more resilient city. And a lot of that is thanks to those FEMA programs.
Yeah, and I agree with that again from having that experience. And I do think as you've built your staff and the consulting support and the education of your residents, it becomes putting a system together to be able to respond when it happens and if it happens. And I congratulate you on having that partnership with FEMA. Now, we have also sort of worked on the reform of the community development block grant program as a disaster relief program. I know you've been a leader in that reform as well. Why does that need to be changed? Why does that program need to be changed?
I appreciate that that was your next question because I mentioned a moment ago kind of two lanes of funding. And the FEMA funding, the best way I can describe it is meant to fix a community and fix the things that were damaged and hopefully fix them to be more resilient for the future. But that FEMA funding is pretty much dictated by the Stafford Act. There is a Bible that kind of says what FEMA can and cannot do, and there are certain parameters based on damage assessments that trigger certain things as to when FEMA gets involved. On the other hand, the CDBG money, specifically CDBG DR, disaster recovery funds, there is really no Stafford Act for that. There's no Bible. There's no definite trigger that says this money is going to come to a community when X, Y, or Z happens. I will tell you that I think Lake Charles was a poster child for the need for CDBG-DR because of what I just told you a moment ago. We got hit by 4 federally declared disasters over a 10-month span. No city in America has been through that before, and it took us longer to get CDBG-DR than any city in American history. And there's a lot of reasons for that. The fall of 2020 was a very emotionally charged environment in Washington, D.C., and politics were very difficult at that time. We were in the middle of COVID. And though it pains me to say it, it is the truth that the population of Southwest Louisiana and Lake Charles just does not carry as much weight as a major metropolitan area. I guarantee you, if South Florida had been hit by 4 federally declared disasters over a 10-month span, they probably would have got CDBG-DR quicker than we got it. And so I say all that today to say that I do believe there's a lot of room for improvement in that system. We finally got it. We finally got a commensurate and equitable response from the federal government. So I will call that a win. And so now my advocacy is really not for Lake Charles, but it's for other communities. I don't want another community to have to go through the wait that we went through to get that equitable response. And I know this may sound a little naive and cliche, but it shouldn't matter what your clout is in Washington, D.C. If you are an American citizen and you go through a natural disaster, agencies and funding should be equitable. And again, perhaps I sound a little naive by saying that, but I do believe there's a lot of room for improvement in the way those CDBG-DR dollars are allocated and how Congress can act on those. It literally takes an act of Congress. And if the political wins are not what they should be at the time, then you could be waiting as we were for over a year.
Well, Mayor, I can tell you, we are with you 100%, and we're very supportive of trying to make that program, the CDBG DR program, more responsive and actually community friendly. We also agree that it shouldn't matter the size of your city, the state as well. NLC represents all cities, towns, and villages in America. And one of the things I'm going to tell you that we want to be able to use you to help us spread that message because, as I shared before, we're seeing all of these extreme events all over America. And what happens in one city clearly impacts another city, but also we can learn. And as you said, Lake Charles is a poster child for resilience and rebuilding. And so, thank you for that answer and input. The other thing that you kind of talked about is infrastructure. A lot of times, our residents and folks don't see our drainage systems and our water systems and the pipes, wastewater systems. So they don't feel like there should be an investment or why are we focusing on that? But clearly, through these storms, hurricanes, you've had to really harden your system. How have you done that through the development of infrastructure projects?
Well, I'll start with drainage. And this was a program that started in 2017. Prior to 2017, the city of Lake Charles did not have a proactive drainage cleaning program that was something that would happen on a regular basis. Prior to 2017, the city would really just address drainage or clean out drainage when there was a complaint or when there was a problem. Well, to really prevent those problems from happening, you have to be proactive about it. So we launched this program in 2017. As I said, we went through 2020 and 2021, and we realized, all right, we can't wait and just pay cash for this program every year and get through 6 to 7% of the city. So City Council authorized the city to go into some debt, and we are now at about 78% through the entire city of cleaning out our underground drainage system. We believe that system was certainly imperfect before Hurricane Laura in August of 2020. However, it does not take an engineer or a scientist to understand that when you go through two hurricanes and a 1,000 year flood event over a 10-month span, your drainage system is going to be even further compromised. So the stuff that we're pulling out of these drains, I guarantee you, and this is certainly what we are advocating to FEMA, is that those storms exacerbated what was going on. So happy to say that we're cleaning out that system. Again, very hopeful that we are reimbursed by FEMA for some of that, and we should be. But even worst case scenario, if we're not reimbursed by FEMA, it's work that needed to happen. We had to do it. So drainage, we have a better drainage system, and drainage is better today in the city of Lake Charles than it was pre-Hurricane Laura in August of 2020. I'm very proud of what we've done with our water system. We had water meters prior to 2020 that were basically 70-year-old technology. It was the old system where you had to have a meter reader go and look at every meter. if they went, if they dusted the dirt off the meter and actually got an accurate reading. It was always suspect. We are 98% finished. We use some ARP funds from the federal government. We are 98% finished with a project where we have replaced every antiquated water meter in the city with automated water meters. This is key because what we found in February of 2021 was when we had that massive freeze. Construction in Lake Charles is not really anticipating those freezes like you have in the Northeast, and so we had over 1,200 water lines on private property that had busted, and that caused water pressure to drop throughout the whole city. We had to have city employees literally scouring the streets in trucks trying to look with the naked eye and see where they could find these water breaks. And it was literally just trying to guess where the water was coming from in certain yards. It was madness. So we had about 5 or 6 days where we didn't have sufficient water pressure. Today, if that exact event happened, one employee sitting in a room could look at a screen and give a printout of every broken line in the city, because you'd have those automated meters showing that they were running. And then those meters could strategically be turned off. We believe if the same event that happened to us in February 2021 happened today, that 5 or 6 days without water pressure today would be about a day, maybe a day and a half. Elevating our wastewater collection systems and pumps, putting generators at our wastewater pumps. All of those things are hardening this community. Some of it is money that's city money. Some of it's ARP money. A lot of it is FEMA, HMGP. And so once again, with water, wastewater, and drainage especially, we have a much more resilient infrastructure today than we had pre-Hurricane Laura. Our electrical grid is privately owned. We have a private utility, Entergy, but their resilience has really improved. And we recently went through some tornadoes, and those tornadoes did a lot of damage. We were out of power for a day in certain pockets of the city, and I know that was inconvenient for some, but had we had the electrical grid we had prior to August of 2020, when those tornadoes hit, that one day without power probably would have been 3 or 4 days without power. So every time we go through something like this, it's unfortunate, but we've also become maybe somewhat of a well-oiled machine when it gets time to go through an event like that. But just in general, this community is so much more resilient and so much stronger from an infrastructure perspective than we were 4 years ago.
Mayor, you've talked a lot about infrastructure, federal programming, getting the systems hardened. Part of the infrastructure and what drives you are the people that live in Lake Charles. The 79,000 residents, probably a lot of them you know because you grew up there. Take us through how they've been sustainable and resilient through all of these extreme weather events. How have they rebounded, and what are some of the challenges they've gone through with all of these extreme events?
Well, I know I'm biased, and I know every mayor in America would probably say this, but I truly think we have some of the most resilient and strongest people in America here in Southwest Louisiana. With what we've been through, this community just continues to bounce back, and I give the lion's share of that credit to the people here. Perhaps the best way to answer or fully to elaborate on that question is give you an example of something that I saw happen after Hurricane Laura. I saw a gentleman who was cleaning up a yard and putting a tarp on a roof, and across the street was a house that was damaged even worse and had more debris and more issues than the house where he was working. I stopped to him and talked, and he said it was his neighbor's house that he was working on because his elderly neighbor was out of town, and he knew that if he came back and uh, had to face the mess that was there, it would be really tough on him. I asked where he lived, and he pointed to the house across the street. The one that I mentioned was looking even worse than his neighbor's house. And he chose to first go work on his neighbor's house, who was elderly, who really needed the help, and then tend to his own affairs. That's just the way Southwest Louisiana is, and that's the way that the people are here. So it's kind of in our blood, it's in our DNA. But it's also important to recognize that a community's issues are really just exacerbated after a natural disaster. So when it comes to things like income inequality and certain neighborhoods that have better insurance than other neighborhoods, those things are very evident in the aftermath of natural disasters. So even 4 years later, there are some neighborhoods you can drive through in Lake Charles and everything looks fine. There are some neighborhoods you can drive through and it's very evident that a natural disaster came through this neighborhood. And again, we're working to remedy that with our DR money, CDBG DR money, because it took so long to get it. Some of that money has not hit the streets yet, but we're getting there. And the people of this community have really risen to the challenge.
Yeah, I mean, it does take, especially given all of the events that you've experienced, a long time for those who may not be as wealthy or may not have as much access to feel as if they can rebuild. And I'm glad to hear that story about your neighbor who would actually, this is all rural Southern way, if you will, go out there and clean somebody else's instead of theirs first. That's a great community, and Lake Charles is blessed to have that kind of culture. So, city speak, we have local leaders and others all over America. And in fact, I think this is the best podcast in the world, Mayor. But if you were sitting someplace with a group of local leaders and they say, "What should I be doing now, just in case an extreme event happened in my community?" What advice would you give them?
Well, I would utilize pre-positioned, or they're called push packages, kind of colloquially, uh, pre-position packages as much as you can. That way, in the aftermath of a natural disaster, you're not scrambling to find a vendor or a supplier or a an engineer or an architect. You can have a lot of these FEMA approved pre-position packages ready to go, to where if God forbid something happens, you can pull the trigger quickly. That's probably another lesson that we learned with Laura is we did have a lot of pre-positioned packages, but there were some services that we did not have those for, and we've changed that since. So make sure you're following FEMA regulations, but maximize pre-positioned packages. Maximize the amount of communication between your local and state agencies. Here in Louisiana, GOSEP, Governor's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness, is very active when it comes to helping with evacuations. And the communication between local and state agencies is vital. It's important because the city of Lake Charles does not have, and most local cities don't have the revenue, the manpower, the bandwidth to evacuate a city and get outside of your own city limits with buses and things of that nature. So maximize the communication locally you have on the state level, and encourage citizens to stay aware, be prepared. Evacuations are not fun, but sometimes they're necessary. And locally, I think we've done a very good job of pulling that trigger to call for an evacuation only when we need to. And I think the benefit of that is people tend to listen. And so encourage your community to stay weather aware and really to listen to leadership when it comes time for those suggestions of what they should do with certain events.
So, and thank you for that, because I do think a lot of leaders will say, this is not going to happen to me. There's no way, these kinds of extreme weather, hurricanes or tornadoes is going to happen to me within, months of each other. So I do think the advice that you've given is going to be very helpful to others. So I'm going to ask you my final question. Just tell me why Lake Charles, Louisiana is the greatest city in America.
Well, I mean, Clarence, you just said it. So the fact that you said it means that we are the greatest city in America. I mean, you're the executive director, right? So,
Oh man,
uh, am
if I had a
do
straight
I have the executive director of National League of Cities on record saying Lake Charles is the greatest city in America? Thank you. Other than the fact that you said it, I would say that Lake Charles is a place where you can have a very good career. We have very good paying jobs here, very dependable and steady paying jobs here with a lot of industry. And it's also a very family friendly environment here. It is a great place to raise a family. We have so many fun opportunities with festivals and our downtown environment and our lakefront. I know I'm biased, but I have a blast here on the weekends with my 6-year-old son and my 4-year-old little girl and my wife. And sometimes I have to remind myself or ask myself, are you enjoying this city and your family so much just because you're the mayor? Or if you weren't the mayor, would you still be having so much fun raising a family in this city? And it really is that latter answer. I really enjoy being a dad and a husband and a business person in Lake Charles. It is a great city to be successful, but also to raise a family.
Well, Mayor, let me tell you, I speak to a lot of leaders throughout America, and to have the opportunity to speak with you has just been an honor. And I feel like we're friends. So I'm going to call you Nick, my friend, and say that, you are the right leader for your city for a number of reasons. First, you care. I can see that and hear it in your voice. Um, you're passionate and you're doing it for the right reasons. So I look forward one day to coming to the greatest city in America, Lake Charles, Louisiana, and sitting down talking with you. And we're going to start our conversation about what type of razor do you use on your bald head, like I do. And then we'll go from there, family and friendship and all of that. But what an honor to have you on City Speak, and wish you the best of luck through this season. We'll be tracking Lake Charles and pray that nothing does happen. But if it does, I know that they have the right leadership and they're prepared. So thanks for your time today.
Clarence, it's been an honor and I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks for listening to City Speak with Clarence Anthony. If you like this show, let us know. Share this episode with your friends and make sure to subscribe. We're curious to hear what you think, what you want more of, and how we can improve. If you have feedback or an idea for a guest you'd like Clarence to sit down with, send us your thoughts at cityspeakpodcast@nlc.org. Join us next month for a new episode. Like and subscribe here or wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time.